Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. I'd like to welcome you all to our event here. Thank you all for bearing with us. We apologize for the delay. We had a bit of technical problems, but inshallah we'll begin now. So I don't want to take too much of your time now. So I'll just introduce the topic and briefly introduce the presenter today, inshallah. So the title, the lecture is entitled "The Proper Relationship Between Belief, Scientific Knowledge, and Mystical Experience, Reconsidering the Position of Imam Al-Ghazali, stated in his Ihya'a Ulum Al-Deen." A popular myth endorsed over the last centuries that Imam Al-Ghazali destroyed intellectual thought in Islam, and it precipitated the decline of a golden era. In this lecture, Al-Ghazali's upholding of the findings of intellect and science will be related to another phenomenon. This is to claim that certainty is only obtained through Sufi or mystical experience, which is beyond the stage of the intellect. The popularity of this phenomenon is argued to be implicitly motivated by the influence of modernity, exemplified in the tension between the last Sheikh al-Islam, Mustafa Sabri Effendi, and Muhammad Abdu. What is at stake in this tension is whether rational proofs remain certain or whether modernity has shown the need for empirical proofs needed to modernize Muslim beliefs. Very quickly, our dear Ustad Sheikh Mustafa Steyer is a research assistant who is a part of Tabah Foundation's Order of Knowledge project. He has a master's degree from the University of London, Institute of Education, Curriculum and Pedagogy. He is currently completing his doctorate of philosophy and theology at Oxford University. Additionally, he has studied and continues to study the traditional Islamic sciences and has been doing so for the past 15 years. He is also certified to teach traditional logic. Without further delay, I'd like to invite Ustad Mustafa Steyer.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما تعلمنا وزدنا بفضلك علما. Alhamdulillah, bismillah, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Thank you for coming and for traveling in many cases. Allah bless you, and inshallah ta'ala the heart of what is intended here will be conveyed, even if the format has to be a bit flexible and things might come out in the question and answer, inshallah ta'ala. The point is not necessarily for us to come to a critical understanding of Imam Al-Ghazali. The point is for us to be able to apply our traditional categories to modernity, to make sense of the world, and to learn how to live as Muslims in a way which goes beyond simple outward aspects of our practice, which are sort of allowed in the secular world, but for us to maintain the categories of our theology that are needed for us to be able to think about how to maintain a contact with our theology. So some of the take-home points, which I'm happy to focus on these rather than allow the structure to sort of prevent us from getting to these points. And I'm aware also there are people out there who want to prove that this is Imam Al-Ghazali's position, and there are others who couldn't care at all to do that. They just want to know what the deen says, and they want to know what to do and how to understand their deen properly. However, in a sense, Imam Al-Ghazali is an authority, and therefore he is important. But I will try not to bog down into the debates about how to interpret him, but for those of you that are interested in it, I have the texts ready to show their role in understanding how Al-Ghazali himself maintained three levels of belief, which are imitation, so belief through imitation or taqleed, and demonstration, and to literally, and this is important for the current Tabah project, to establish that we still do and should believe in demonstrative science. So a demonstration is the only form for arriving at a conclusive proof. If you don't have a conclusive proof, then you are, according to Imam Al-Ghazali, still in the realm of taqleed. Because you might have a proof, but it's dialectic and it rests on certain premises which are themselves not yaqini. So it's not, and we call these musallamat or mashhurat. So they're things which are taken for granted or which are commonly known. Like people give the example of one should not lie. Now, from our own piety and whatnot, we assume that this premise is absolutely true, but that's not what our kalam scholars say. So also, when we quote from scripture, this is it's still one of the musallamat. In other words, because you have to have a proof to believe in scripture in the first place, or you have to understand that scripture. So a demonstration is a proof which is absolute, and we can go into that more. And it's crucial as well because modernity doesn't. There's some of you who, wouldn't like those terms to be thrown out like that, but just for us to get forward, contemporary philosophy doesn't believe in something called demonstration. They want to prove everything through empirical premises in some cases, and in other cases they have other reasons for not wanting to accept demonstrative proofs. So this makes us have to rethink our own belief in this category of iman. Otherwise, we have an aqlaniyya khandaqiyya. We have a rationality which only survives in ghettos for our madrasas, and it doesn't reach out to the modern world. So either you are 98% of us who are, even as Muslims, we're in secular educational institutions and contexts, or you're the 2% who are locked off into a madrasa, وَبَيْنُهُمَا بَرْزَخٌ لَا يَبْغِيَنْ. And that's غير مفيد, because knowledge has to be something we can apply. Okay, and so the take-home points, Sheikh Al-Alawi in his Al-Balagh, which was a response to the French entering into Algeria, said roughly that the only sound approach to modernity is to ignore it. Now, in order to do that, you have to have an alternative. But if we are up to our eyeballs in secular educational institutions, it's not realistic to say that. And there is a tendency as well for traditional scholars not to teach much aqidah, just enough, right? And there are reasons for that, but the problem is that any place that you don't have knowledge and a malaka, wahm fills in. So we're encountered by not only bid'ah but kufr and everything as the musallamat and mashhurat of our time. They are what's taken for granted. So that's point number one. Point number two, Ghazali did not destroy rationality in Islam. To be honest, I don't think that's suitable for this audience, so I will mostly skip over it. Although, from what I understand in general, the atmosphere amongst certain intellectuals in the Arab world, this is an idea which they email to each other, convey to each other, believe, and it's just rife. However, I don't believe that is this audience tonight, but it's good to be aware of that. And number three, Ghazali defended all the different types of belief, which means you have to put them in relationality to each other. So some scholars will stand behind one or the other, some behind two categories. So for instance, it might be very common for a kalam scholar to defend imitation and demonstration, but to have all three, imitation, demonstration, and unveiling, means also you have to have a notion of unveiling that does not contradict demonstration to maintain those. Sheikh Abdul Ghani Nablusi is another person who uses a triad like this. But we have to defend that demonstration still stands. Does scientism challenge our traditional rational proofs? And what I might do is just start with that point before going into the structure of the talk. So let me end with number 4 here. So there's a tendency, also another take-home point from tonight, inshallah. There's a tendency now amongst modern scholars to doubt the strength of kalam proofs. But we must understand that kalam for Al-Ghazali, after Al-Ghazali, became demonstrative. So I'm not advocating that we forget our entire Islamic tradition and hold up the Ghazali flag and forget about everything else. We should venerate him, but we should know who he is, and our, just as he establishes in his own ethics, the best way to have a state of the heart is through demonstrative knowledge. When you have demonstrative knowledge that something is fearful, you fear it. When you have demonstrative knowledge that something is a cause of hope, it causes hope in your heart. So if you know who that scholar is and you know that he's venerable, you will venerate him. You don't have to quote a few stories which were referred to 6 different scholars in the history books in order to venerate him. So in other words, some of the stories that we pass around, they're not an accurate reflection of his life. So we want to know who he was and build our knowledge on demonstration such that our veneration is built on that. So what I mean to say there is Imam Al-Ghazali is also very well known for taking the science of kalam and demoting its role. So before him, you have a feeling amongst Ash'ari and other scholars that if you want to become a wali, you learn your dalils, and if you know all of your dalils in a way which is qat'i, then khalas, as they would say, that's it. You've done what you're supposed to do as a Muslim, you are wali, etc. Not to simplify, because we have scholars like the Qushayri family who are in the same madrasa with Imam Al-Ghazali, and they understand the role of tasawwuf, etc. But the word that they often use for Ghazali's view of kalam is therapeutic. So kalam is a science where if a person has imitative belief through taqleed, and they have a doubt, then kalam is there to remove that doubt. But it is not, as he states in Al-Iqtisad fil I'tiqad, it is not a science for knowing haqa'iq al-ashya. That's what he says. That's what he himself says. Okay? And he also says that the kalam scholars are very close to the awam. He says this in Marvels of the Heart. So he says they have now istidlal. They have like a type of evidential reasoning, but they still don't get to yaqeen. But this does not negate the fact that Imam Al-Ghazali in the Mustasfa talks about a kalam which is a metaphysical kalam. He defines it as something that has as its subject existence, wujud, kal wujud, etc. He makes the same note in Al-Imla. He says that it is possible for a kalam to be something which encompasses metaphysics and the states of the heart, which basically is his mukashafa and mu'amala. And his mukashafa in the Ihya has multiple layers. One of those layers is a demonstrative science of the afterlife. So what we have to see is that when he says in the Iqtisad, I've written 100 pages on the science of kalam, and it's everything that you need to know for that therapeutic role of kalam, he's talking about the kalam of his time. So if the kalam after Fakhruddin Razi, through his students like Al-Iji and Taftazani and Jorjani, if they were able to produce a kalam which is demonstrative or which is truly burhani, then it is a science which is dealing with the haqa'iq. And it is that science which he might have wanted kalam to become in his day, but he knew that the scholars of his day, either they were not going to accept it from him, or they were not capable of it, whatever his beliefs were, he pointed to two kalams, a kalam which is jadali and a kalam which is burhani. So when we say that Imam Al-Ghazali says the way, the tariq al-akhirah basically, the whole tariq al-ma'amala, as he says in the Ihya, is learn your aqa'id, your beliefs through taqleed, and then water them with acts of worship and avoid kalam. He says kalam is like planting a sapling, and you want to strengthen that sapling, so you start to smash it with a hammer, right? He says, so instead, do the acts which will make it grow. Okay, why though? Because he did not believe that even if you did like he did, and you mastered the kalam of his day, that you would ever get to the haqa'iq. So it is a waste of time, because it's like taking a medicine when you're not sick. But we have to remember that for Imam Al-Ghazali, we have three things. We have regimen and remedy and nutrition. So what he's saying is that the remedy is to empty your heart through taqwa and through getting rid of attachment to desires where the dunya is an end in itself, which create the vices in the heart. So when you like something just for its sake, and it's not for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and it makes you protect it and defend it, and it makes you give that thing preference over the deen, and you're attached to it, and it's not something which has a ladha, which is related to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or the afterlife or the incorporeal, that repetitive interaction with it through habituation makes a vice. This is his conception. This is how he joins between tasawwuf and the philosophical ethical tradition, which is a massive part of his theology. So after that, you need a remedy. After you empty the stomach, you need a remedy. In traditional medicine, you empty the stomach, then you take the medicine, then you can start eating again after your stomach has settled. So if you get a stomach bug, it's the same thing. If you keep eating, it just makes a fire, the stomach turns more and more, and one is in pain and everything, and it won't go away until you spend a day or two or three eating nothing but yogurt, potatoes, or drinking lemon juice, right? Then you can go to the nutrition. Now the nutrition is the haqa'iq al-ashya. That is what causes felicity. These are eternal truths which perfect the human soul and make it fit to have the sa'ada as it is described by Imam Al-Ghazali. So if the kalam of his day doesn't do that, then of course he's going to say this is like taking a medicine which is not going to get you anywhere. But this is different when you get to Al-Iji. And we have to remember that Al-Iji and these other scholars, their books used to be the core and the backbone of the curriculum at Al-Azhar. And that's no longer the case. So this curriculum, which Imam Ghazali should be a bridge to, has disappeared. And the Muslim Ummah was struck on the head. And from this trauma, amnesia occurred. And then we woke up and someone said, forgive me, but Ghazali, Ghazali, Ghazali. And there is an Ammiization of our sciences. In other words, books that were written for the masses have become the books that the ulama have and teach. And even the scholars of the Azhar of the past, Sheikh Hassan al-Attar, Baqit al-Muti'i, and a whole host of Sheikh Abdul Rahman al-Shirbini, who were masters of that post-Razian syllabus, they're gone. And so we have a revival now where we're going back to Ghazali and we're misunderstanding Al-Ghazali as well. And that misunderstanding I'd like to come back to later on. And how does that map to the Ihya? Why is it that when people pick up Imam Al-Ghazali they make that mistake? just to shorten it into 2 sentences, and this is something I took away from Sheikh Afifi Lakiti, people generally read the Munqidh min al-Dalal, and then they go to the Ihya. And this does not set them up to understand Imam Al-Ghazali properly, because the Munqidh min al-Dalal is a text that he wrote when he was called into court. So this whole engagement that he made with Aql, he was being accused of engaging with the falasifa of his time, because he was sifting through their rulings and saying, okay, 3 of these positions are kufr, 17 of them are bid'ah. And actually, he didn't even say that. He said around 8 of them are ajaz. He says this in the Tahafut, that what they're saying might be right, but they can't prove it through aql. But you can prove it through scripture. For instance, that the soul continues to exist after the death of the body, something like this. So he made that engagement, and he wanted to remove the kufr from their syllabus, but to take the haqa'iq al-ashya' from it, because knowledge is knowledge. What we know is either in al-hadrat al-ilmiyah, it is either in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's presence of knowledge, and it's true, or it's not. If it's there, for us to reflect that is a perfection. And if it's not, then it's not. So, in other words, as he himself said, if it comes from the falasifa, well, the falasifa were the scientists of their day. Of course, I don't think he would do the same thing with the scientists of our day. Scientists of our day, first of all, they remove all haqa'iq by definition, because they don't believe in universals. They don't believe in essences. So, when they are, their empirical knowledge denies essences and universals. So, naturally, they're going to say that demonstrative knowledge is invalid, because demonstrative knowledge is based on making a string of universal propositions based on the realities of things, which is a little bit of a technical logical topic, but it has to be understood, because there's no alternative to get out of modern science other than to go back to traditional science. Okay, so the structure, and I think we can sort of skim through some of these topics, is as follows. So the 3 levels of belief and how wrong impressions of each came about: imitation, demonstration, unveiling, and how Al-Ghazali is misread by some contemporary scholars. Some of which has been summarized already. And number 2, text from the Ihya establishing that he maintains demonstrative knowledge. And number 3, the modern context. Al-Azhar, Call to Renewing Islamic Sciences by Muhammad Abdul, Modern Empiricism, so the analytical school and reformed epistemology, and students returning from Levant, and a conclusion which is related to the takeaway points, Ghazali as a gateway to late schools rather than a cul-de-sac. So why might a scholar be a cul-de-sac? If we take an example of the science of fiqh, so Imam Al-Ghazali was crucial for the development of the Shafi madhab, but no one reads his books today as part of the pedagogical process of learning Shafi fiqh. You just don't do it, because the books have been superseded. And really, all of his books, except for you could even argue that the Mishkat al-Anwar has been superseded by Suhrawardi, who built on it. Everything has been superseded. His books in Usul al-Fiqh are no longer part of the traditional pedagogical method. However, the Ihya was such an island that no one is even able to understand it. Imam Al-Ghazali mastered the science of amal or mu'amala or praxis. In other words, if you think of it as that knowledge is 2 parts. There's the theoretical part, what is there out there in terms of truth, but there's this other crucial part of Islam, which I had the great benefit of listening to and benefiting from, and having the company of Dr. Yassin Muhammad, who's hiding in the back there, speaking at the Ghazali conference in Abu Dhabi on the Mizan al-Amal. So the praxis is the whole side of how do we tread a path that purifies the heart. And Imam Al-Ghazali was unprecedented in this, which doesn't mean that his book should necessarily replace all forms of Sufism, but what it means is that he offered a path which is defensible. And the benefit in that is that you don't have to, there's no leap of faith, there's no, so if someone is not in a position to find a spiritual guide that they can trust and that they do trust, his path is, I don't want to say rational, but it's explained. He builds it on a science of the soul and a science of ethics, and because of that, it's something that you can understand yourself and know where you're going. You don't have to put hand in hand and not know where you're going. And he's unique in that. Bismillah. So I will skip over a lot of this material, and to be honest, I think that the best thing for this Mubarak audience is for me to throw out a couple things to inspire some discussion and then have a discussion. Some of you have traveled, and some of you are yawning, and I have it written down in my notepad who's yawning. So, Bismillah. But I still love you, I promise. And I won't say your name out loud. Okay, so Bismillah. Okay, so 3 levels of belief and how wrong impressions of each have come about. So number 1, imitation. What do we mean by imitation? Is it a valid source of Iman? First of all, Imam Al-Ghazali would say there's more than one type of imitation. Right? So one of the bases of imitation is having a good opinion of the person who has brought that news to you, like a parent or a teacher. Husn dhan, he says. Okay? This is not the only type of imitation, though. And we also shouldn't simplify this notion of belief, because in the later tradition, and so again, we do want to know who Imam Al-Ghazali is, but we don't want him to effectively cut us off from our own tradition. Where did our tradition go in the debates of a Sanusi and a Taftazani and others, as are reported in the commentary of the author of Al-Jawhar himself, Al-Laqani, and others? Effectively, they said even the commoners, even if they're not taught how to prove their beliefs, it's just natural that they do istidlal, they do evidential reasoning. They walk out and they look at the mountains and they say, Allah, right? That's a type of istidlal, even if it doesn't sound like a syllogism out of a logic department from modern university, thank God, right? So this is a type of movement of the heart. It is a dalil, it's a proof, it's iman. And so Imam Al-Ghazali wants to establish this. There are elements of the Ash'ari madhab which deny the validity of imitation, and there are others who acknowledge it. He wants to build on it. And he, although he's a giant figure in the rational tradition, he's building this on the hadith, the woman who embraced Islam. I believe she was unable to speak. She pointed at the heavens. This is enough. Bedouins who took the Shahada immediately and left and didn't come back, and their Iman was considered, or at least they were not asked to learn dalils before they went. So Imam Al-Ghazali builds on this. So is this blind faith? A lot of new atheists, for instance, will say that all religious people believe something on faith, which is, basically it's something which is unlikely to be true, and you believe it without any kind of proof or reasoning. Even in imitation, there's often a type of reasoning that's involved. Either a reason why you should believe it on imitation, etc. So I'm just saying this category. Also, there's a sense where there's what Imam Al-Ghazali would call the efficacy of similitudes. So when you read a Quranic metaphor, or when you see a symbol, like Imam Al-Ghazali in his Mishkat al-Anwar, he builds the whole thing out of the symbolism of light. And it's not a rational proof, but it has an impact on the heart. So it's a type of knowledge, even if it is not a logical type, and Imam Al-Ghazali works with it and talks about how it can actually turn the heart from the dunya to the akhirah. So this is something that you only learn by spending years kind of taking notes on the Ihya. But in each of the stations of the fourth quarter, Imam Al-Ghazali allows for that station to be obtained either through imitation or through demonstration. And he says, knowing the real proof, and if you think about the topics of the fourth quarter, Tawheed, the divine unity, which is the cause of tawakkul. So the knowledge is the cause of the state, right? If you think about those topics, you can either, or fear and hope, you can gain the state either through imitation, just taking the scriptural references and the Sufi stories and not making a proof and not analyzing it. You can still obtain fear and hope through that. And that fear and hope can turn a person from having uns bid dunya, intimacy with the corporeal dunya, or uns bil akhirah. But to have intimacy with the incorporeal and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the afterlife. And that's still not love. So he says what you obtain through the inclination is intimacy, uns, but not mahabba. So there is still a rank to be obtained through joining between knowledge and the heart turning, right? These are sort of technical points which are only appreciated by understanding the Ihya, but this is why Sheikh Al-Afifi said that we don't really read Imam Al-Ghazali as much as we should. We read the Munqidh min al-Dalal and we read a couple parts out of the Ihya, and we don't even know what this Imam said. We don't know, unfortunately. Okay, so number 2, demonstration. I will take this opportunity to talk about rational proofs, and just to make one point. So 2 or 3 minutes to understand what is a rational proof and what is an empirical proof, and what's the difference and what's at stake. I mean, and this is important because 98% of Muslims, I think, now are educated in secular institutions, and they get just their fard ayn of their own deen, unfortunately. So we are up to our eyeballs in a secular syllabus which was only developed over the last 60, 70, 80 years, and now has NGOs and whatnot enforcing it, even in tiny villages in Kashmir and all kind of wild things, but it's reality. So a rational proof, in some cases it's built on the attributes of something. So if you take, for instance, a human being, and you say a human being is a rational animal, not to debate this definition, it's already been both attacked and defended, also by Sufis on both sides, by logicians on both sides. So it's not my role to do anything other than repeat what they've said. So because you are rational, and it is an essential attribute in you, and you so there's no infikak. You cannot take rationality outside of you, right? So people sometimes give the example like of a crow. A crow has the black color always in the external world, but it's not part of its essence. And this is why, like, for instance, you go to certain places and you find a flamingo that has ingested some chemical and it's blue or purple or black or whatever, right? So, but rationality is part of your essence. if anything in your essence isn't there, you cease to be. So it both in the external world, or we say extramentally and mentally, it's part of the essence. Can't separate from it. Now that means, just like fire, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells the fire to be cold, if something is an essential attribute, you can't not have it without not being. Right? So there's an entailment there. And that entailment is what we call universal. And this is how you make rules. When you say al-fa'il marfu', it's because the fa'il always has the sifa being marfu'. And then you can build a science of grammar on it. If you don't have these rules, which are always universal, and you just notice sometimes the fa'il marfu', subject is in the nominal case, not always, then you can't build a science out of it. And really, if you think about it, even modern science, what they call the laws of physics, where you have claims like conservation of energy or matter or whatever. They say it's a law, but they haven't investigated every part of the universe. So what they've actually done then is incomplete, what we call istiqra' naqis, incomplete induction. And they are calling it a law, and their science is built on things which are not universal. A universal is like it's like you have to have a set. That's the best way to think about it. Now, some of the things that you say about things in the world, like human beings or rational animal, you can sense those things. So we say everything in the world is either a substance or an accident. The accidents are roughly 9. Everything has to have color, place, location, doing or receiving an action. These are all the attributes that everything in the world can take. Everything we've ever thought or said is going to be a substance or one of these 9 accidents, and they're called the categories. Now there are things that are not any of those 9 categories that are essential to our theology. I'm going to give 1 or 2 examples. Like if you say a steering wheel in front of you or a computer or whatever, if you say that's a unity is not like a color. With a color, it's black, you can sense it. The shape, again, you sense it. But unity is only perceived by the mind. Also existence. This thing exists. There is no scientific equipment that can capture what it means to exist. There are other examples of this, right? So, like I said, modern science denies universals. Now, the fact that something is a universal, again, is not something which is empirically verifiable. But it's crucial to all of our sciences, because if you don't have universals, you have no science. All of your science is based on the fact that, like a fa'il, in the case of grammar, or every science you'll find that is built up this way. Fiqh even, the actions, the mukallaf, they have to be universals. Haram, halal, all of the bits that make up your sciences, they're basically universals, and they allow you to make up a rule-based science. If you don't have universals, you don't have anything. Okay, so what is it? What is a universal, and can the modern world deny it? First of all, they do deny it. They say there are only particulars in the world, and particulars are made out of matter, and this very quickly gets you into materialism. Right? So, what does it mean for something to be universal, and is there a proof for it? If you can't verify it empirically. Anybody have an idea here? And I'm going to switch over to an interactive format very quickly. But what is the proof that something is universal? And if it's not empirical, can we still prove it? What's the definition of the universal according to our manuals of theology and mantiq, and anyone is free to blurt it out? So, yes, Bismillah. Yes, but so those are all universals, but what is the definition of a universal?
Maybe you can feel and see, and you see it in reality. You see it in reality. You can feel it and see it, and
This is a good point, but what you can see and feel are particulars. Okay, why? Because senses they sense juz'iyat, particulars, right? But the aql, which is the khasa in a way, it's the specific, it's what makes mankind different from al-an'am, as Imam Al-Ghazali would say. It's what differentiates us from pack animals, is the ability to perceive the universals. So the universal,
that which is part of our a priori knowledge.
that's half of the intelligibles. And by the way, this a priori knowledge is also denied by modern science. They deny first principles. And they claim that their laws of, as I said, the laws of thermodynamics and whatnot, they pretend almost as though they are first principles. They make them a law, okay? But they're not even based on you can get halfway there with first principles, right? Through even just the law of non-contradiction, you can start to get towards the law of preservation and whatnot. So that's half of it. So basically, though, so the yes, sir.
I think maybe a universal, which is a kulli, as opposed to a juz with a particular, has to do with ishtirak.
Tamam.
Right? It has to do with a group of things, and whether there is one haqiqa or different haqaiq, which is like, for example, your genus, it will be different essences
Right.
make up.
Right.
But the main important thing is ishtirak.
Yeah. So it's ما لا يمنع نفس تصوره عن الشركة بين كثيرين. So it has to be something like a chair where more than one thing can enter into that universal meaning. And the mind abstracts it, and it's universal and above the particular, and they deny the existence of this thing. Okay, can we prove the existence of universals? And how would you do that? Okay, it's not an essential attribute of the thing. If it was, every chair would be, a human being would be defined as rational animal in which more than one particular can participate. If it was part of the essence, it would have to be part of the definition of that thing. That's how it works, right? So, if you look out and you take, for instance, sun, even before we knew there was more than one sun, is there any logical problem with sun, with there being more than one sun? Is there a logical problem with that? Right, there's not, okay? But if you say Idris or Umar, and it's a name, or if you say Abu Dhabi, and you're using it as a proper noun, then you're using it to refer to a particular. So what we call universals, you can prove that they're universals. That meaning has to be salih. It has to have a suluhiyya. It has to be appropriate to incorporate more than one particular. So, but they just don't want to engage in anything that's not sense-based. But they're already using a metaphysical principle to rule out anything that isn't sense-based. And they're also positing, they're making a judgment based on something that they deny the existence of, which is things that aren't sense-based. You have to rule it out.
So how do we understand mathematical entities, like a circle? Like no circle that I could draw on a blackboard is a perfect circle.
Yeah.
But we all know
Yeah.
in our mind what a circle is.
Well,
Is that not a universal?
Yeah. The modern theory of mathematics is now what we would call post-constructivist or imaginalist or something. There are some academics I hear in some of the universities out in California who are trying to revive an Aristotelian notion of mathematics where you're dealing with mental entities, right? You're dealing with forms that the mind grasps. So they're trying to bring some realism back into mathematics, but it's been dumped. And the dumping goes all the way back to Blaise Pascal. And Blaise Pascal, when he made something called a stipulative definition in his mathematics, it allowed, mathematics used to be like Euclidean, where you build up from first principles to make geometric proofs and whatnot, and it was demonstrative. So with Blaise Pascal, you start the European process of flushing reality. Okay, we no longer have to build our definitions either on first principles that are half of what the mind grasps, nor are they speculative matters that we build up. So once you open that door, then you move from a realist mathematics to a modern mathematics where it's post-constructivist or it's imaginalist. We just say we do it because it's pragmatic, it works, and we just make tens of thousands of mathematical equations, and eventually something will actually reflect how the world works. Once it does, we grab that and then we stick it in a mathematics and engineering textbook, and millions of students around the world will learn it as applied mathematics, but there's no theory or reality behind it. And that is all of our sciences. If we don't, as I said in the beginning of the first slide, if we don't do our own theology, and we don't, I'm not saying absolutely ignore modernity, but I also don't want to correct Sheikh Al-Alawi on this point. But we have no choice. If we don't spend the time learning our own aqidah and fiqh and tasawwuf and our rational tradition, I'm going to mention a point that I heard from Sheikh Abdul Fattah, a great Tunisian scholar who came through Istanbul a few months back. He said 15% of the Quranic ayahs are about fiqh. He said, the other 85%. Alaysa min ad-deen? And isn't it part of the deen? Aren't we supposed to have this tanbih? And aren't we supposed to revive our intellectual tradition, especially in a day where people don't want to hear the hukum? If they don't want to hear the hukum, it's because they need to be motivated. Like Imam Al-Ghazali says in the Mizan al-Amal, the only reason that people aren't striving to perfect themselves is either because the ulama aren't suitable to direct them to it, or it's because they're lazy, or it's because they're ignorant. There's like no other possibility. We should all be striving as much as we can to become awliya and as close to Allah as we can, and there's no excuse to just let our life go by where we just do fard ayn, etc. Right? So, and we're in a situation where 98% of us spend, our mind has been trained on secular paradigms which have no map to reality, no relation to reality, and they don't care. It's pragmatic and empiricist and whatnot. And going back, as I said, to Muhammad Abdu and others at the Azhar, this was the approach that was taken. We need to renew our sciences. Now, some of the scholars after that they're fully aware it's a mistake, but they're not at the level that the previous scholars were at, and so it's not recovered since. Now, what I would like to do is use the rest of the material that I prepared for Q&A, and so I'll transition to that, inshallah, by referring to some of that material. So if we want either to dig down into who was Imam Al-Ghazali and what did he want to say and how could he have been a bridge to modern post-Razian theology, then great. And if it's more interesting or beneficial to go into some of the other topics, we can do that instead. So first of all, there are a trail of texts by which one can understand that in the Ihya, Imam Al-Ghazali basically says that the virtues are meanings which are muntadim min ma'ani thalatha. So they are meanings like love, repentance, unity, tawakkul, that first the person has to grasp it, and then if they grasp it through a demonstration, then nothing can shake their certainty, and they've grasped the intelligible form. And once that form is in the soul, it is going to have an effect on the soul, because the soul perceives that meaning, and when it does, if it perceives something as fearful, then it's going to fear it. Something is hopeful, it's going to hope for it, right? And those he explains the certitude that produces this state, and he says it's basically made out of two parts. The certitude, and he refers the reader back to book 1 and to Bab al-Yaqeen, which is in a discussion of what are the signs of the scholars of the afterlife in book 1, Kitab al-Ilm. And basically, the two aspects of certitude, one is Adam Shek, lack of doubt. And when he explains it, if you look at the text that he uses, he's basically summarizing the whole discussion of dialectics and rhetoric and demonstration, Burhan, from the Ihya'a Ulum, which is his most extensive work on mantiq. You can textually verify that that's where he's drawing from. And he uses the word Burhan several times in the Ihya in that context. And why is that also important? And this maybe links to something that we can discuss. I heard this from a student who studied with a Jordanian person who studies Kalam, and he said that it was recognized that many of those who studied Aqidah usually after a Western education, went to the Levant and studied, that they believed that the Kalam proofs were not demonstrative, and that the only way to achieve certitude was through tasawwuf. And just to reflect on the implications of that, the implications of that are that we have imitation or annihilation or inspiration or a Sufi maqam, but we don't have a middle maqam of the Leal or proof or burhan for our aqidah. And if the implications of that are that our beliefs are not certain, then it sounds like you're saying the beliefs are not certain. Okay, so if you say, well, there's a 96% chance that God exists, what is the hukum of someone who says there's a 96% chance that God exists? It's a kufr, laysa kadhalik. Yeah, there's no way out of it. We have to believe that our proofs are demonstrative. Not each one, right? But you have to arrive at certainty. That's what this life is for. So please, we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to help us use it. So if we are doing something similar to what Muhammad Abdu did, which is to have a view that to accept the narrative of progress, the West has transcended our proofs and whatnot, and that now they know there are no such thing as universals. They know that those poor Muslims were given a Sharia because they didn't know how to conduct themselves, but now we're enlightened and we're free and whatnot. Whatever it is that was peddled, or if it was coming from analytical philosophy or modern symbolic logic, that the old proofs all had flaws in them. They all have whatever the source is. We need to look again at analytical philosophy and symbolic logic and see that the biggest problem with what they're doing is that they're getting rid of universals and metaphysics and whatnot. They are skeptical. They are in a biased way anti-metaphysical. So if we take that as the truth and then we judge our tradition by it, and we don't have the time to research through institutes like this Mubarak Institute, Tabah, and to reinforce our beliefs, then we are in genuine trouble. So that's an option. And then just offering to people Sufism when not everyone has that ability also even to achieve the certainty through a Sufi practice, then you're cutting off their possibility of belief. Okay, and there's another text which is the defense of demonstration in the Mi'yar. I'll just summarize that. Imam Al-Ghazali says basically that if you believe, if someone tells you, or tells he actually says a mutakallim, a kalam scholar, that their son's head was chopped off, and they say, well, did he die? Or I doubt that he died, or I don't know if he died. He said, this is waswas. So occasionalism, which is the doctrine that only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has ta'thir, has the ability to affect anything in the universe, he's saying that does not undermine demonstration. So he might place the certainty in that demonstration in the sunnah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and he shifts it, but he maintains it. So he also then maintains universals. He maintains the demonstrative science. And again, like I said, you can trace the passages going from the Mi'yar into the Ihya. And basically also these three levels become the eschatological levels from Kitab at-Tawbah. So he says that you can obtain knowledge that sins distance one from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and receive a pain from that this is going to be a hijab over my beloved Yawm al-Qiyamah, and anyone who is distanced from their beloved feels an alam, they feel a pain in the heart. And so he says you can have that knowledge through imitation, or you can have that knowledge through demonstration, but the ones who gain it through imitation become the people of Najat. They become the people who achieve salvation, but not the people who obtain felicity. And if you achieve demonstrative knowledge, and there's a key here which I'll just throw out again, so something we can debate, because I'm going to wrap up in 1 minute here, inshallah ta'ala. When you if you go back and read Mizan al-Amal and understand what's going on there, you cannot achieve demonstrative knowledge according to Imam Al-Ghazali, and anyone who understands the ethical theory that he works with, you can't achieve that without having gone through the ethical purification, because you have to polish the mirror. You have to, in a more technical sense, you have to remove what he calls in the Mizan al-Amal, Ihya'a Infi'aliyah, the passive disposition in the soul or intellect from the ghadab and the shahwa, from desire and anger. If you're not controlling them, then they're going to fill your mind with objectives and thoughts and whatnot, as opposed to your mind telling them what to do. And when that becomes the case, one's reasoning and whatnot becomes excusing oneself acting on behalf of anger and acting on behalf of desire, which are the pig and the dog for Imam Al-Ghazali, and one becomes someone who is yamshi mukibban ala wajhihi, someone who is walking upside down on their face is on the ground and their feet are in the air, in terms of their meaning. So that is his praxis. If you don't go through the process of purification of that, you can't have knowledge, because your mind is being used to do the opposite of what it's supposed to do, right? So that basically means that the structure of the Ihya is there to purify the mirror and to obtain knowledge of the beloved, who is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Imam Al-Ghazali says in one crucial place that philosophers and others who have that moment where they've longed for their beloved, they've missed them, they've finally gotten by the guards that guard Layla's caravan, and they've gotten into the tent, and Layla's sister's there and she's part of the game. She says, Layla's down here, and they meet and they go in the tent and they're together, and Layla shows signs that she's happy to see you, they're accepting, and then you're just about to embrace her, and then the scorpions and the snakes in your thobe start to bite you. This is the praxis of Imam Al-Ghazali. And so we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us the himma, inshallah, to purify ourselves in this life and to make our hearts the mirrors which are able to reflect His beauty, and for us to feel the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and for that love and khashya to prevent us from all haram, and to make it easy for us to deal with masa'ib, inshallah. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to guide this ummah to a correct theology which puts everything in its place, imitation and intellect and heart, and the uncovering of the haqa'iq, and for us that to be implemented not only in our institutes of education but in our own selves, to use it and understand it, to get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وآخر كلامي أن الحمد لله رب العالمين. الله يبارك فيكم.
Assalamu alaikum wa barakatuh. Sidi, just on the issue of universals, just 2 or 3 points that are related. The first is the ontological existence of universals. Obviously, we know it was rejected by Ibn Taymiyyah as well as Suyuti afterwards. And is it something that exists only in the mind? Is it the i'tibari, or is it something?
Right.
And the reason why I'm bringing that up, because but we mentioned modernity, and then there's post-modernity, which is regarded as anti-essentialism.
Yes.
And which presupposes that modernity is essentialism, which means that they accept something like essentialist, right. Philosophy, and there was these foundations, foundationalism. So would you say that this essentialist position is merely i'tibari rather than something that actually exists ontologically?
Okay, it's an absolutely massive question, and so to try and tackle it quickly, I mean, first of all, Imam Suyuti was going against people who in his own time were great Sufis of the Aqliyat tradition, like Sheikh Zakaria al-Ansari, who writes commentaries on mantiq and whatnot, and doesn't bother refuting Imam Suyuti. So Imam Suyuti ala ra'sina wa aynina. But there was a story which I think was actually told to me by Sheikh Hussam Sayyid that Imam Suyuti, happened to meet a logician who had bad character. Okay, and he had a bad experience, and he, for whatever other reasons, although we don't know any other, turned against logic, and he used Ibn Taymiyyah's treatise. Now, also in, when you're sort of classifying or periodizing Islamic history, Ibn Taymiyyah is, his type of theology is almost typical of modern or pre-modern theology. And part of it is his nominalism, that he's saying that things don't have essences. But I don't think that we even really understand Ibn Taymiyyah, because when you really look at it, there's a whole other side to him, which is that he's saying that, he's saying as the divine names or meanings descend and become more and more particular, that the universal of a thing is above the individuals. So it's sort of not in the corporeal world. Well, he's still sort of saying there's a universal, but it's not present in the world. Now the whole matter of just understanding what is our position on the existence of universals, this is studied in our Kalam manuals under the topic of Al-Mahiyya in Al-Umur Al-Amma, which is the general metaphysics section, which all of the Indian and Ottoman and Persian and Azhari manuals of Kalam were prefaced with. Where are they now? It sounds like it sounds like a song, right? Where are you now? So, but they're gone, and yet they were universal when our sciences were strong. So, the quiddity, basically, how is the quiddity existent in the external world? Well, the particular that we see in front of us, the human being, is a composite of the universal plus the mushakhasat, plus the individuating principle, which is that particular matter and place and time and color and all those types of things, right? So the universal is present through the existence of the particular. So the particular is what exists in a more tangible way in the external world, but a part of them is the universal. They exist, therefore the universal exists. Right. This is a demonstration. What is modernity and what is sort of pre-modernity, and I mean just a working definition that it's not a technical definition, but if you say that pre-modernity is realities and post-modernity is, or let's say modernity is doubting all of those realities which all traditional communities largely agreed upon. The medieval Muslim, Christian, and Jewish theologians, and probably others as well, they believed in all of these realities, and by and large. So, if you say that modernity is this tendency to start to reject all of this, Descartes is generally considered the first modern or early modern philosopher. Everything that he did wasn't, his saying that the whole material world is just extension, and material is extension, is patently false, because extension is a property of it. To say that everything that we see is extension, and then there's a spiritual substance, it's just all he's trying to do is arrive at certainty. But what he's doing is he's applying mathematics to the world, and he's foregrounding the thing that we do know, exceptionally well, which is mathematics, and he's just getting rid of all the other qualities of the world. When I talked about like substance and the nine categories of accidents, he is, we have quantity and quality is a huge category. There's so many categories, even like knowledge, they're qualities. Virtue is a quality, vice is a quality, and there are qualities of living things and qualities of non-living things. It's like a whole science in itself. He wants to reduce everything to quantity. So where are you going to get when all of your thinking after that is, kind of based on these types of mistakes? John Locke also a big part of getting rid of essences, and Immanuel Kant. They all played like a part, but all they did was get out of realities, and they ran away from حقائق الأشياء ثابتة, which is the first line of العقيدة النسفية. Why does he start العقيدة النسفية with حقائق الأشياء ثابتة والعلم بها متحققة and أسباب العلم? Because if there are no realities, then we don't even know. It's not we don't know who is. We don't even know what Musa is from the Quran. Musa, is this a razor, or you just open up nonsense, right? When you so if you don't have al-ma'arif al-aqliya, if you don't have the basic rational principles that make a human being distinct from a pack animal, you don't make something that you can reveal the Quran to. You can't reveal the Quran to a hajar, to a stone. You can't reveal it to a goat. In spite of some of the YouTube videos that are out there of the animals laying down for them. I do believe in that, by the way. Alhamdulillah.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim.
That's a different mode, though, when you're not in aqliyat mode, right?
First, thanks to Tabah Foundation and Dr. Sheikh Mustafa for coming out and presenting. I just had a quick sort of contextualization question, and I'm sure you had a lot more that you wanted to show, but it occurred to me when you had stated earlier kind of the discourse between Ghazali and the post-Ghazali scholars of the use of kalam or demonstrative proofs, whether it's to dispel misconceptions ala Ghazali or whether it's to establish metaphysical creedal realities. If we look at the traditional categorization of the study of Aqidah, you have ilahiyat and nubuwat and sam'iyat. And generally speaking, definitely all of sam'iyat is not something that's going to be established by demonstrative proof. So things of eschatology nature, of the akhirah and so forth, and probably a good portion of nubuwat. So if we were to draw the line, and here I'm speaking actually for a lot of the average people, who are probably think themselves, do I need to know all these proofs in order to really believe correctly? If we draw a line, do we draw the line at the existence of God and say this is where we most definitely, most certainly, as a preamble to the rest of belief, have to develop demonstrative proofs? And then if we can arrive to the veracity, number one, the existence of God, then we arrive to the veracity of the Quran and the veracity of the Sunnah, then the things that I am informed about, if I believe everything the Quran says, and the Quran speaks in terms of universals. So does that suffice to accept the idea of universals? Obviously having an internal sort of Muslim conversation, not having a conversation with the outside world. that's the line of thinking, because the point that Sidi Aminullah made about, universals, there's an argument that they're extramental. And so if we're going to prove that they're there, and there's not extramental haqiqa to them, and they're umur a'tibariyya, I think we're going to be challenged. Not that I don't believe in them, but unless we're going to go to like a Neoplatonic idea of ideas and forms are out there, and they're this perfect kind of manifestation, and the particulars just try to live up to that. Whatever the case may be, I think, the main point is, do you draw a line? To what extent do we need demonstrative proofs in our individual creeds?
Bismillah. Massive question, which should be explored by a committee of scholars and something written up which is sound enough to maintain our position today. Why? Because, again, Imam Al-Ghazali said, for instance, if you have a child, by the time that they're 15 or whatever, you're responsible to have taught them everything that they need to know to defend themselves against the bid'ah of their time. So these things now, like the existence of universals, they're beyond bid'ah. They're probably kufr, depending on what you mean by it. I mean, like I said, even Ibn Taymiyyah, in a certain sense, believes in a certain way in a universal. The matter of which elements of the creed you need to defend, I think that Imam As-Sanusi and other people, they outline what elements that those are, so that there's not a door, a vicious circle in your belief, that you have to believe in a God with certain attributes before you can even believe in the sidq of Nubuwwah and whatnot, in the prophecy. Those are outlined, and that's why those attributes are chosen in the simple Ash'ari manuals. And you're right, what if you do need these other elements that were in the metaphysical bits that aren't in the simple manuals, like Imam As-Sanusi's manuals? Should they be added? Arguably, they should. I mean, it's not too terribly hard to prove the existence of universals or realities. I mean, even many of you probably seen Peter Kreeft's book on Socratic logic. He actually talks for 3 or 4 pages, almost in prose, that he would be talking to an American high school student, which is very different from how you would speak to a British high school student, right, Hajj Idris? So, alhamdulillah. So it's very accessible. That's my dig at American culture. But if that's not an oxymoron, so American culture. But anyway. So, and he has a long footnote where he summarizes what Ibn Sina says on the existence of the universal. And what Ibn Sina says is quoted right in the Kurdish and Iraqi manuals that are, commentating on Taftazani on universal. And I can't let this mention of perspectivals escape. All of the things that I mentioned, like unity, universals and whatnot, they're either rational attributes or they're perspectival attributes. Now, there are 2 types of perspectival attributes. Let me ask you, what is the difference between zina and nikah? Is the difference between them perspectival, or does it exist extramentally? Or how about borrowing and sariqa, theft? Okay, and these are debated in the commentaries on Jam' al-Jawami'. But who is there today who's able to teach Jam' al-Jawami' with the Taqrirat al-Shirbini and whatnot, and explain how perspectival attributes have an ether? They have an effect on the world. They change the same act from being haram to being mubah, or even wajib, or whatever. And they talk about how that can be. Right? And that's from a kalam point of view. Then if you want to look into what Sheikh Muhyiddin says in the Fusus al-Hikam about the i'tibariyat and how they're more real than external things, because this glass, I can make it unreal very quickly. It ceases to become a cat's as soon as 2 seconds after you drop it. But perspectival things, you they are the method through which the individuals receive their being. If this thing doesn't have a position and unity and everything, it can't exist. So there are two types of perspectivals. There is the i'tibari wahmi and the i'tibari haqiqi. And the i'tibari haqiqi are like being a universal. And what you find is that certain analytical philosophers like Quine, he says we have to get rid of this thing called meanings, right? But in other words, stop looking for the meaning of things because you're just making it up. That's what he's saying. Because he wants to deny the whole faculty of reason. And what are they doing though? They're ceasing to become... when you get rid of universals, you get rid of humanity. You're going back to Baqar and So it's you see how their theoretical and their practical sides of their society are related to each other. When you get rid of this, you go back to that. So, but what did he say in the end? He said we have to at least have sets. Like Venn diagrams where you have, this is Bani Hashim, and this is Arab, and this is human, and this is animal, and this is body, and like a he said you have to have sets, otherwise you can't do any science. And he said, and you have to kind of believe they're real. Does that make him a Platonist? So he realized if you get rid of those, you can't even speak. You can't do anything. You can't have a science. You can't claim your science as real. And that's why you have academics these days saying, well, it's just a game, it's just, I just threw that theory out because it's a game, they're pragmatists and they're just trying to get points in their academic scheme or whatever. So I don't want to take up the time for the questions, but so the perspectivals are extremely important. You don't have any, when you talk about nasb and rafa and haram and halal and all these things, they're all perspectivals, but they're perspectival haqiqi, they're not wahmi. Wahmi perspectival, there are two types. They're either things that are impossible to be, like a square circle, and they don't even have a surah. They don't even have a mental existence. And then you have things like Frodo or Jedis, or which we all know exist, right? But they exist in the mind. They're figmental entities. Or you have Bahrun and Zibaq, you have a sea of mercury or whatever. But that's possible. But there are other things that are impossible.
There's one in the back.
Siri Mustafa, shukran for very illuminating presentation. We really appreciate that. My question relates to the question of taqleed. Now, in the Mizan al-Amal, as you very well know, Imam Al-Ghazali presents a long discussion comparing the philosophical way to the Sufi way, and then he says the Sufi way is superior. And then at the end of the Mizan al-Amal, he ends off in a discourse about the madahib, that doubt, shukuk, is very important. And I presume that he is critiquing those who are practicing blind imitation of madhab. Now, how would you reconcile that with the idea in the Ihya where he makes taqleed or imitation a valid form of faith? So I presume that when he critiques those who blindly follow madhab, he's perhaps referring to the scholars. They should base themselves on rationality. But when it comes to the awam, the general public, perhaps it's fine for them to follow taqleed. However, as you alluded to the point, that even in taqleed, there is an element of rationality, because if you follow a particular way or a particular madhab or the authority of that madhab, you have a reason for choosing that particular madhab, and once you've made that choice, that rational choice, then you follow it through taqleed. Shukran.
if you're one of those people that before you decide if you're going to become Shafi or Hanafi, you read all of the Leals of the madhabs and you decide which are better, then mashallah, yeah. So there are different people that do taqleed differently, aren't there? And I'm not saying he's right, but Alistair McIntyre says rationality is something like thinking within a tradition. But that's a different point as well. If you're just imitating, picking it up and doing it, and you're not judging that madhab, you will have some rationality. You will say, "Gosh, I'm in Medina. This is it's obvious. It's obvious." If you were alive in Medina in that time, what would you have done? You would have learned from the people around you through a living tradition, and therefore you become Maliki, right? No, I'm not Maliki, but and anyway, most of the best scholars of the Malikis were Kurds who left the kind of Persian Ottoman world, like Khalil, and went there and wrote the Kafiya and Ibn Hajjab. These are all anyway. So, but yeah, it is taqleed. It is taqleed if on the particular points you don't have a Burhan. So why would Imam Al-Ghazali sort of permit it? He permits it on practical grounds. So I mean, he almost says the same thing about ta'wil. Don't start doing ta'wil of scripture unless you can completely jump the gap and land safely on the other side, which is to have a demonstration, to know what the scripture means, to know enough of the rational tools to use nadar. That's his position. I'm not saying that's everyone's position. So, and he, at the beginning, many people think that Ihya'a Ulum is just a handbook to the tahafut to help you defeat the rulings of the philosophers. But Imam Al-Ghazali says, aham wa a'am of the reasons, the more general and the more important of the reasons he wrote it was to make people capable to do nadar. Nadar is the first of the wajibat. It's the first thing that becomes wajib after a person becomes mukallaf. And that is how you get out of taqleed. Now, if you realize, though, that most people, and he uses examples in Mizan al-Amal of the people who are practicing the crafts, right? So they might have gone through one of the kutab, and then they apprenticed, right? Which was why they didn't have teenagers back then, right? As to quote Hajj Idris fil Hudur, secondary school is a failed social experiment, right? So they would have gone into the guilds. They don't need, it's not realistic to expect them to master all of the reasoning tools and whatnot. Again, though, that's his position. That's not Imam Sanusi's position. Imam Sanusi's position is everyone has well, he has more than one statement, but you have to do nadar, and you have to arrive at your iman through dalil, and you have to do it with a demonstration. You have to have at least one burhan for each of the wajib points of your aqidah, which, as Sheikh Walid said, does not include the elements of the afterlife, because all we have to know about them is that they're mumkin. We do rationally have to know that they're possible. We don't have to, and they, arguably can't be proven. There are scholars who do try and prove them. Badi Zaman, Said Nursi, and others, but that's, yeah. So taqleed, Imam Ghazali allows for it on practical grounds. There's a comment by, this is discussed by a couple people when they're talking about his passage on, he talks about the 5 secrets that exemplify the relationship between the zahir and the batin. And he talks about, should you do ta'wil of elements of the afterlife, of the divine attributes, and he breaks it down. He doesn't just say yes or no. He says, basically the Ash'aris have the middle position between those who have jumud ala zahir, which is also like a type of taqleed, right? So, so you have to know where to do taqleed. But if that's where you are, it's valid for him. You should move, but you should only move if you can get from one chair to the next chair. You don't want to be in between chairs where you start the process and you don't get to demonstration.
Unfortunately, we don't have time for more questions, but we do have refreshments, and we encourage everyone to stick around for that. So as long as we have I mean, members of the audience and our Sheikh here with us, you can still engage with him, inshallah. So please stick around for the refreshments. We also have materials on the side for you to have a look at. Jazakumullah khair, Sheikh Mustafa, for coming and sharing this very enlightening lecture with us, and also Jazakumullah khair to you all for engaging with the material in such an enlightening way. So inshallah we'll end there, and please do stick around for the refreshments.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد المرسلين وصحبه أجمعين اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد في الأولين وصل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد في الآخرين وصل وسلم وبارك في المال الأعلى إلى يوم الدين ما شاء الله وكان ما شاء يكون ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم اللهم أرنا الحق حقا وارزقنا اتباعه وأرنا الباطل باطلا وارزقنا اجتنابه اللهم اجرنا من النار ومن خزي النار ومن قرون النار وادخلنا الجنة مع الأبرار يا عزيز يا غفار اغفر وارحم وتجاوز عما تعلم إنك أنت العزيز الأكرم وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وصحبه وسلم وآخر دعوانا الحمد لله رب العالمين الفاتحة